Hey everyone, Wayne Fox here. Today I've got a video about my favorite tool in Lightroom, the graduated filter. And I decided to do kind of a walkthrough from the very basics all the way to even things like range masking. And so I put some timestamps below, so if you're only interested in one aspect of it, you can go to it. It does get kind of long because there's a lot of stuff involved. Finally was able to get my hair cut despite the social distancing. I have some mask that I've had for a long time, and so I was able to wear it. My daughter's a beautician, has a salon in her basement, and so I was able to go and finally get my hair cut. It was a month past due. So good news, no hat for a few videos, and then we'll see what happens. It might be a few months before I can get another haircut. I hope everybody is able to stay safe out there and hope everybody's doing well. I know there's a lot of people with some serious challenges in their life, and if you're one of those and watching this video, I wish you well, and hopefully we can get through this. Anyway, let's get into the graduated filter and talk about how really amazing it is and how powerful it is. Okay, so the graduated filter is a local adjustment, which simply means whatever you do only applies to a part of the image, and the graduated filter is how you determine which part it will be applied to. You can click the graduated filter icon in the local adjustment bar, or you can hit the letter M. Either one will open up the tool. The filter will remember the most recent settings that you used to make a filter, and they will return. And if you make a new filter and hit new, that setting will also be there. You can clear any of the settings out by simply double-clicking Effect, which will clear all of them. Or you can click the word next to the one that you want to clear, double-click, or you can double-click the indicator button, and that will zero them out. Typically, when I make a graduated filter, I do not put an adjustment in advance. I know a lot of people say to do it, but you're just going to have to change it anyway. So the key for me is get one made, get it approximate, because it's always a matter of refinement anyway. So what I will do is hit the O key, which will turn my mask overlay on. Click and drag. Wherever you click, the effect that you apply will be 100%, and then it will gradually get less till wherever you let go, and that's where it will be 0. If you have the O key on or the mask overlay on, then you can see that effect. If the color doesn't show well enough because of what the image consists of, holding the Shift key and the letter O will let you cycle through white, black, red, or green. Typically, I use green because it shows up in landscape images pretty clearly because it's such a vivid green color. Once you get it in position, you probably need to refine it. I very rarely try to create a very accurate one initially. I usually will just make one and then I will refine it because it'll always need refined anyway. So just make it quickly. Click on the tack to move it. Click the center line to rotate. The further away from the tack you click, the more refined you can make that rotation. Click the other lines to expand or change the area of gradation. And one other thing that's very useful is if you Option or Alt click one of the lines, that lets you leave the tack in place and it will adjust the gradation proportionally on either side. That's actually very helpful. When you make the filter, you can hold the Shift key down to make sure it stays straight. Holding the Option key down will force the tool to go on either side of the point you click, which is very helpful on things like horizon lines and things like that. And of course, if you hold Shift and Option, you get both effects where it will start in the middle and it will stay straight no matter what you do. You can make more than one on an image. Let's go ahead and make one here. Let's just assume this was our sky. And we're going to go ahead and turn the mask overlay off. And we're going to put an exposure adjustment. Typically, you would maybe darken the sky. I would usually increase shadows and decrease whites, which of course you can't see in this image. But this might be a typical adjustment for a sky. If I click anywhere else on the image, you'll notice the black dot in the tack. That means it's selected, so whatever changes I make in the panel will apply. If I click somewhere else in the image and start making a new one, whatever the settings are in the panel will be applied as well. You notice those panels, those are all there. If I have one selected and I want to make a new one and I don't want these to be applied, make sure you click the New button first, and you'll go back to your defaults, which if you've zeroed them out are going to be 0, or you might have a default that you've left in there, but now whatever you do won't be affected by the one you just made. Obviously, you can click on a tack to select it, and you can also hover over any tack to see briefly the mask overlay. As long as you're hovering over it, that will show without having to turn it off and on. Sometimes you make an adjustment and it's not enough. You might apply maybe an exposure adjustment, or maybe a shadow adjustment, and you go all the way and everything's perfect. You've actually tweaked it with a brush tool, which we'll get to in a minute. One thing you can do is you can right click on the tack and duplicate it, and another exact duplicate will be applied to the top. One warning is you cannot adjust the one that's underneath. There's really not a good way to get to it. If your gradation area is not very critical, you can always move it off, select it and adjust it, and then move the other one back on, because you don't have to have them very aligned. But if you've done some brush erasing to get an edge or anything, obviously you don't want to do that if you've duplicated them. One last little trick, you can make a graduated filter be a global adjustment. Let's say that you've gone into your global adjustments and you've adjusted your shadows as far as they will go and your whites as far as they will go, and you need more. All you need to do is move off of the image, hold the shift key down in this case, and click and drag away. So now my graduated filter covers the entire image, and whatever I do will be global. You can also just click on a filter and make it, and if you want, you can just drag it off the image. Once it's off the image, of course, everything is applied. This is a trick I've used on a couple of occasions. A lot of people tell you to click on the corner or something. You do not have to click on the image to create a graduated filter. A lot of people don't realize that. One last thing to cover is the overlay itself. Let's hit our T for toolbar. You'll notice I have show edit pins. There are 4 choices: auto, always, selected, and never. What auto means is that when I'm over the image, it will show, and when I drag off, it won't show. If I hit the H key while I'm over the image, that will turn them off. If I hit the H key again when I'm on the image, you'll notice it goes to auto. If I hit the H key while I'm off the image, you'll know it goes to see that it goes to always. So usually if you turn them off and on, I want them to auto hide, because I prefer to just drag off for the lines to disappear. The advantage of selected is it will show only the one that you've selected when you drag on. So notice this dot's up here. If you go to selected, now that dot disappears. I can only see the one I select. One problem with that is I cannot now select the other one. So that will get rid of the dot if it's annoying you, but make sure you turn it back to either auto or always so that you can see them. Usually for me, it's just drag on the image and hit H till they show up, or if they're showing, hit H so that they hide. That's the quickest way to handle that. Let's go ahead and pull a few images up, and let's do some simple graduated filters and make some adjustments. And then we'll get into some advanced masking and how you can basically create a mask with a graduated filter. And then we'll talk about range masking, which is actually really powerful and really helpful a lot of the time. Okay, let me just start with this image. This image I've done a lot of work to, and all I really need to do to finish it off is add a few simple graduated filters. Let's go ahead and hit the M key to open our graduated filter panel. As you can see, I have no effects in our new option. So the first thing I obviously want to do is drag a sky down. I'm going to hit O to turn my overlay on. You'll notice the check mark comes on at the bottom. I'm going to click about here and add just a really long, soft graduated brush. Now, one thing I'll mention, I'm holding the shift key down, by the way. One thing I will mention is that I don't need to go to here, because the later transition part of this is extremely subtle. So even though it's going into that water a little bit, it's going to have hardly any effect at all. And as you can see, even though the green's there, if I turn the overlay off and on, you can see very little green showing up. So it's going to be very subtle, because we're not going to change this that much. Now, typically in a sky, what I do is pull the exposure down just a little bit, but then I'll pull my shadows down even more, which will add a little bit of contrast. It seems to be a little bit more natural effect to me. Now, one thing I notice here is that my sky's pretty even from here down, and I want to make sure that looks a little darker. So I'm going to do another one, and I'm going to start about up here at the very top. I may even start off the image and drag down. Now you'll notice I didn't change my settings, so I put the exact same values in this one that I had in the one before, because I didn't go to the new button. So my second filter duplicated my settings, And in this case, I think it looks pretty good. I would probably work on this a little bit more. Maybe I would pull this one and compress it just because this area maybe needs to be darkened a little bit. But, good enough. I think this, if we go over here, we can turn them off. This little toggle turns our filters off and on. You can see here I have the sky at the top is lighter than, and now I've kind of got it back to what I would expect and probably what I was actually seeing. The only other thing I would mention about this image is the sand down here is quite dark and contrasty. Now, some people might like that. I think it's a little too dark. So I'm going to click the new button and you'll see all my settings reset because that was my default. I'm going to click in this point right about here with the option key down and I'm going to drag it. Now you'll notice how hard it is to control that angle. Well, I'm not going to worry about that too much because I'm going to go ahead and make it quickly and then I'm going to fine tune it. Now I'm guessing I need to be about right in here. And if I turn my O key on, it gives me a little bit better idea. Oops, now you can see the mistake I made. I can either redo it or I can just grab it and swing it 180 degrees. I actually clicked and dragged the wrong way, which is something I do once in a while because I'm just kind of not thinking. Turn O off, and in this case, I'm going to lighten the exposure a little bit, but more important, I'm going to bring my shadows up. This is a shadow density, and if I bring my shadows up, I'm not going to have a lot of effect on that water. Now, as you can see from this, my transition area is not in the right place. So I'm just going to click and drag it. And now it's pretty smooth. And you'll notice that I'm not making the water's not changing much, if at all, because I've mainly used my shadow slider to make that change. It looks like my angle's off just a little bit. So let's go here and we're going to drag a little bit further just to make sure we don't get too much of that blackish halo around there. We could even go a little further than that because we're really not affecting the water much. So very quickly, those three filters, we went from this to this, which I think is a little more pleasing. Now, maybe this, as I look at this again, I think these are maybe a little too strong. So we're going to pull that back down. And now I think we've got a pretty good image. This image presents an interesting choice because I can actually use a graduated filter to go two completely different directions. This was a delightfully foggy morning in Colorado. And because I'm closer to this hillside than most of the rest of the image, the fog isn't as strong. So I can choose to try to make this part of the image a little more foggy-like, shall we say, or I can choose to try to reduce some of the fog effect. Either one. Let's try the first. So let's add a graduated filter. We're going to add it about right in here. And we're just going to bring the exposure up a tiny bit. We're going to pull our contrast down a little bit. And as you can see very quickly, I'm able to almost even that whole thing out so it looks a little bit less obvious. Very, very quick. Let's go ahead and delete that one. And let's go the other direction. Let's start and drag one out from over here. And this will need to be a fairly big soft one. And we're going to just bring the exposure down a tiny bit. Contrast up a little bit, and maybe a little bit more on the exposure. And we'll notice we have kind of an area in the middle here where it isn't working. So let's kind of drag it until it looks fairly even. And that's not bad. And I could go even further. Now, this is how I originally worked on this image, and I actually did some increase in contrast and saturation. Now, I have a new tool in that the dehaze filter is an available option as a local adjustment. So what I might choose to do now is drag a really soft filter way back over here, try to maintain this angle that I have right about in there. And let's go a little bit further. And now I might gradually try to dehaze this image, which pulls some of the fog out and actually restores and brings in some of the contrast. And so I can get this image probably much closer to what I originally wanted. In this case, I'd probably drag another one out here. And I probably should have turned that off first, but we'll do that. And I'll bring that exposure up a tiny bit. And so I've got an image now that looks, I think, quite a bit better than I started. And it still gives me that nice foggy feel, but it also gives me some of the beautiful colors of aspen trees in the Colorado Rockies. Okay, so let's add just a little bit of complexity to this. Here I'd like to bring my sky and enhance it quite a bit. And to do that, I would probably create a graduated filter. Now the challenge is I don't want this to be something that's very soft from the bottom down. So let's go here, for example, let's bring our exposure down because I still get this glow here. I really want this whole sky to be improved. And we might even add a little bit of dehaze, as I mentioned, and we might want that to apply to the whole sky. Well, that's actually not very hard to do. Now you can see here, in this case, the worst part is what I've done to the mountain actually doesn't hurt that bad, but you can see how black the top of these trees are. And that's actually pretty easy to correct. They've added this brush. Let's turn the mask overlay on. What the brush does is I can turn the brush on and I can either add to or subtract from the mask that I've created. Now, typically what I do, I hardly ever use this with a graduated filter except to erase. Usually I'll have auto mask on, and it depends on what I'm trying to do. In this case, I'm basically just trying to get out of the really dark trees. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to try to find a dark spot and just click one time. But let's turn the mask overlay off, and you can see now that the trees look pretty normal. Now I might even want to take this to another level. I might want to take it out of everything. And so what I would typically do there is I would turn the auto mask off and I would erase it like this. And I'm just going to make sure I get it out of everything close. And then I'll turn the auto mask back on and I'll use a fairly small brush. And then I'll just try to go along that edge. I found that it's more accurate to use something like this and remove it from the areas that are darker than it is to paint it in the other way. It's actually, I think this gives me more control. So now I've removed it from everything except the sky. I've included, and you can see because of the way I've done it, all these little holes in the sky are included. You could certainly try to do this the other way. Let's go ahead and delete that. And what most would do is they would create a brush and they would turn auto mask on, and then they would try to paint along in here. Let's turn overlay on. And they would try to go along, and it works pretty good for this image. As long as you're careful, you can get almost as good as if you did it the other way. But what I've found is that when you zoom in on this, let's take that exposure down quite a bit. When you zoom in on this, you have more likelihood of getting a line along in here than if you do it the other way. Just for the heck of it, let's go back in our history. And as you can see, I don't have nearly of a problem of that line when I erase it from the dark instead of adding it from the light. Auto mask seems to work better. So pretty nice effect. In this case, I would have probably not removed it from, let's see if we can find the step here. I probably would have only removed it from the top of the trees because I don't mind what it's doing to the light mountain there. So one of the great things about graduated filters is our ability to exclude them in parts of the image. And the disadvantage, you know, a camera, when you put it in front of your camera filter, the problem is you usually can only affect a little bit of density and you really can't exclude it, and it's a little hard to fix after the fact. This is a good image so I can really quickly show 3 different ways if I wanted to enhance the sky and really not affect the rock. Obviously, the first way is to use the technique that we just used. We're going to drag a graduated filter down in this area because I really don't want to affect this dark area at the bottom much. One quick comment is you would want to try to leave the tack somewhere that it's going to be a little obvious. So you get a high resolution screen, this tack actually starts to become pretty small. And I can leave this tack anywhere along this line here and I have the same effect. If I leave it over here, once I get to a high resolution screen, right now I'm just working on a 1080p screen, this dot will become pretty little. Be hard to find if you get into a real busy area too. So when you make it, you might want to consider making sure the tack is somewhere that it's going to be easy to see if you need to get back to it later. So there's our filter. Let's go ahead and dial some adjustments in. We're going to go and drag some exposure in, down. We're going to bring some dehaze up, a little saturation down, maybe a little more exposure. And we're getting there pretty close. You know, this is a kind of a quick and dirty. But you'll notice how good the sky's starting to look, but now my rock is getting really dull. So what I need to do is exclude it from the rock. We certainly could use the technique we just used. Go and use the brush, make sure it's set to erase, and simply go in and erase it. And you can see I can actually do this quite quickly, and it's quite effective. And in this particular image, that might be how I would choose to do it. The one thing I always check is I just zoom in on the edges. So let's just take a quick look. And as you can see, this edge is pretty clean. I think we would be able to use it. But instead, let's go back and go back to where we had the brush. And now we're back to there. Instead, I can use a range mask. And the range mask allows me to exclude or include colors or luminance values. The luminance range mask basically lets me exclude any darkness or lightness values that I want. And let's try that one first. As you can see here, I have a range, and anything outside of these two pointers is excluded from the mask. So if I drag it over to here, and now I show this lets me kind of see it. You can see the only areas that are actually included are these kind of pink areas that are now kind of pink. As I drag it to the right, I'm adding more and more. And as I drag it to the left, I add more and more until at this point, it's not everything is included. I can also use the O key and see similar things right there, use my overlay. So what I want to do is I want to drag to the left, and you can see it start to disappear from the rock. And the key is to watch if it's disappearing from anything else. So watch these areas down in here and these areas up in here. And as you can see, I'm starting to also include some of those. Let's turn our O key off so we can just see what it's doing to the sky. And what we're watching for is when this starts to lighten, we've gone too far. So right about in there, if we turn the O key on, we see we're still affecting that rock quite a bit. That's where you can use the smoothness slider to kind of bring that in even further. And I can go pretty aggressively. Now you can see I'm still getting it in the side of the rock. So let's go a little bit there. And between the smoothness and the range mask, we've been able to pretty much eliminate it from the rock. And if you can zoom in, you can see I still have a pretty clean edge. Now, not all images will have this nice of a clean of an edge. It just depends on how much contrast is there. So that's a pretty good choice. If we actually turn the luminance mask off, the question would be, does it affect the sky? And as you can see, I've been able to pretty much exclude everything but the rock by using a combination of smoothness. The other thing you want to look at with the smoothness is make sure you don't have any weird artifacting going on in these tones. But I think that would have worked pretty good. So now let's build a range mask based on color and not darkness and lightness values. The color range mask is a good choice in an image like this because the colors of what we want to include in our mask are pretty dramatically different than what we want to exclude. What we do is we click the dropper tool and we sample the colors that we want to include in the mask, and that will remove them from everywhere else. So if I click here, you can see that I have a fairly limited mask. As I click each point, you can see it changes dramatically. So the real secret to this is to pick multiple points, and I can hold the shift key down. I can pick up to 5 different color values. So I can pick up these whites and these grays, and I can, once I get to the 5th one, if I click another one, you'll notice that my first one disappears. So I can only click and select 5 colors, which usually is enough. The other option, and let's go back here, the other option is to select the tool and to just click and drag and select an area. So we can select a fairly aggressive area, which should have pretty much all of the tones. And you can see when I did that, immediately the sky doesn't really change. Let's just go back and forth. You can see this was a really good choice because it's really not affecting anywhere in the sky, and yet it's really cleaning it out of the rock. If we zoom in, let's put the tool away. If we zoom in here, you can see that my edge maybe isn't quite as clean in this choice. It's a little, I have a little bit of a halo. One thing I can do is use the amount, and that will affect that a little bit. You can see that I can go and I can actually kind of fine tune it. So the color mask was probably my best choice for this image, although using the erase brush wouldn't have been a bad choice either. Okay, so let's use this last image to show a few things. First of all, to enhance the sky, I can just use a Fairly straightforward filter. I can drag it all the way down in here because I really don't mind what it'll do to the foreground as well. And I can just add a little bit of little down exposure. As I said, I'm going to add a little dehaze. Little goes a long way. Pull the saturation down a little. All right, so simple filter there. Now my sky's looking pretty good. When I was at this location, this area of flowers were like they were on fire. I mean, this doesn't look at all like what I was seeing that night because they almost glow. And the camera just really doesn't pick that up like you see it. So what I want to do is I want to add a new filter, and I'm going to drag down here. Excuse me. I want to drag from the bottom up. And now I'm going to kind of position it about right in there. And you can see I'm going to try to follow this kind of angle that goes right there. And I'm going to probably need to be right about in here. Let's turn O on. And that's going to probably be pretty close. So the first thing I'm going to do here is try to brighten my flowers up and exclude everything else. And I'm going to go ahead and use what we just talked about, a color range mask. Now I'm going to turn the O key on, and I'm going to try to click. Let's get our sample out here, and I'm going to try to click in these just yellows, and boom, boy, it looks like it did a pretty good job right away. Now I actually can do this with the brush tool as well. You can see that right there, maybe I've excluded a little bit, so if we want to get that color, I'll shift click right there. And now if I turn the overlay off, and I can start to lighten these flowers up, and I can even add a little bit of saturation. And so I've been able to really brighten these up pretty dramatically. Now I could do the same thing, and one thing I could do is I could go ahead and let's put that away. Let's duplicate that brush. Okay, but this time let's again use the range mask, and let's select like this gray tone in here and pull the density down. So, and we're not going to go very far. We don't need to go too far. And that's not too bad right there. Now you notice if I need to work on this other one, here's my problem, is they're on top of each other. Now in this particular case, no big deal because I can just drag this one off. They don't need to be on top of each other. And then I can usually, one problem you have is that a lot of times you have to select one and then go back to get to the other one. And what I might decide to do here is lighten up everything a little bit more with another one. So if we add a third one, let's go ahead and do a new one. And we're going to drag about down in here like this. Sorry. And that's the wrong way again. I'm not used to dragging them down. And what I want to do is I want to actually affect the greens a little bit as well. So what I'm going to do with this one, I'm just going to lighten everything up a little more. Then I'm going to go back to this one. And let's hit O. Nope, we're going to go back to this one. And we're going to go ahead and darken down the dirt a little bit more. So pretty nice. I was able to actually really change this image really dramatically. And I'm really kind of, this is actually kind of looks like what I saw when I was there. These, like I said, these yellow flowers were just almost glowing. So I think that's enough examples. I think you can see how powerful this is. And the range mask, it's a little intimidating at first, but once you get used to it, it's actually really powerful and actually not as hard to use as you might think. Well, that about covers it. Hopefully I answered any questions you have. If I confused you, or if you have a question, or if you think I'm missing a point, please let me know in the comments down below. In the meantime, I hope everybody's staying safe out there. Make sure you hit the subscribe button down there. And if you like the video, go ahead and hit that like. It'll be a little sparse for me for the next month. I did manage to sell my house. And despite all the challenges, the deal that I had did manage to go through, which is kind of cool. And the reason I'm excited is my new house, I have a much better place to set up to actually make these videos. So they'll be sparse till about the middle of May when I'll be all moved and settled in. And then I'm hoping to actually get into a regular one-a-week video kind of a thing. I just like making them. They're fun to make. I don't get tons of watches. Over time I get some, and That's good enough for me. In the meantime, I hope everybody stays safe out there, and until next time, see ya.